from the mainland or from the water. So there was a speakeasy that ran throughout the Prohibition right there.
Oh, so a secret passageway.
Yeah, well, it was a
that's what it sounds like in a way.
Well, it was you could get in there without being observed, and then it was like a bar upstairs. You see this same type of a walkway that George Bolt had his stonecutters make, and most of these places over here, the entrance,
the
steps.
Stairwell, yeah.
This property next door, the most striking thing about that is if you look up on the top, that's a 9-foot grizzly bear weather vane.
Oh, wow. Gee.
And every single hair on that thing, if you could see it close enough, you'd see that he looks like he's alive, and he's a weather vane.
Wow.
The same artist that made that grizzly bear made my muskie monument down in Clayton. Our neighbor is Pullman Island. That's George Pullman's island, the guy that invented...
To the right there?
Yes. He's the guy that invented the Pullman sleeping car.
Right.
See them both coming by. That's the gadfly. And that's Captain David Dodge at the helm. He's the senior captain. We'll see him down there. This next property is called Casablanca, and it's probably one of the more recognizable properties on Millionaire Road. But again, it's one of those properties where people see gargoyles and different statues, and there's 1,000 different reasons why you would stick something like that in your yard. But the real deal is that during the Prohibition, rumor had it that about 25% of the contraband alcohol that made its way from Canada into Alexandria Bay crossed Cherry Island. And the owner of the island at the time took exception with being constantly badgered by revenuers looking for contraband alcohol. So he set his caretaker loose with instructions that he wanted these animals and gargoyles made. How he did that is he took these pillars and he left them with soft mortar on the interior, and as they cured, he would set wooden dowels into the mortar, and once it was cured and the dowel was rigidly affixed to the base, then he would take burlap and he would wrap the burlap with a heavy baling cord until he got the shape of the animal, and then he would use molder's clay and finish off the smoothing. And each one of these animals had to have an extendable tongue that could be painted red, and the entire message was sticking their tongue out at the revenues, thumbing their nose up. And by the end of the Prohibition, there had never been one pint of contraband alcohol seized or one arrest made on Cherry Island. So either this guy really was a smuggler or he was really good. Hotel, which at the time was one of the most prominent East Coast hotels in the United States, in Philadelphia, home of a lot of very, very wealthy investors. Over the next several years, 10 to 15 years, he moved slowly up the food chain from dishwasher all the way up to maitre d'. And at one point, it became obvious to the owners of the hotel that there was something a little bit different about this guy, because he could be in a room with 100 people in it and make every person in that room feel like they were the most important person in the room. And eventually he was offered a position, a salaried position, as the manager of the Stratford Hotel that would have made him the 4th highest paid hotel manager in the country. And where George made his first financial monster decision was that he turned down the position as the manager of the Stratford Hotel as a salary, because he told the owners that if he was given a salary, he would be more apt to rest on his laurels, but if he was somehow tied to his performance by way of a small percentage of the annual take of the hotel, he'd be more apt to continue to strive for improvements. What the hotel owners didn't know, and George seemed to know it at the time, was the theory of synergy, where you can take the sum of two properties and multiply them instead of adding them together. 1 + 1 = 5. So they fell for that by looking back behind them for 5 years. They saw that the percentage that he was asking for was going to save them up to a third of what they had originally offered him. All of those railings are solid brass, and there's one poor guy that spends his entire summer polishing every bit of that brass. That's his entire job, 6 days a week. He polishes brass. Look at the woodwork in that. Douglas fir, pine, oak, cherry, teak. Look at all the granite work along the waterfront, the way they married it up with the indigenous stone. That's the groundkeeper's house over there. Now we're going to run back up to the Antique Boat Museum, and the much more exciting part of the adventure. First course goes in of fish. We'll check the potatoes, and if they're done, they're not done until they're dried and they've got the salt crust on them. If you just take them right out of that, then they're just a potato cooked in salt water. But what you do is drain them and then let them air dry. And do you know the history of the salt potato?
Not entirely, no.
In Syracuse, Salina Street is where the salt mines used to be. And the most inexpensive labor force were Chinese, but they were all employed making the transcontinental railroad. So the next best thing was the Italian work, or the Irish workforce. Well, the Irish would come to work in the salt mines, and there was always a hot brine pool. So they would show up with these burlap sacks filled with baby white potatoes, and when they would come to work, they would just drop them in the hot pool of brine. And when it would be lunchtime, they'd pull them out and dump them out, and as soon as that cool air hit those hot potatoes, they were cooked in salt. It would brine the crust, so you didn't have to bring salt and pepper with you, or even butter. It would give a nice salt brine to it. And that's why now when you cook these, cooking them until they're done is just the first step. The second step is to pull them when they're at their hottest and let the air expose to the dry potato, and then it encrusts the salt on them, and that's where you get the salt potato. So it doesn't destabilize it, weakens it, and then you want to stretch it through the dessert course. So 350 to 375 is the target, and you don't want to roll through that quickly either. And we're just about 350. So this is the point. This is also kind of a unique dredge. We take buttermilk pancake mix and cornmeal 50-50, so you have that granularity of a finished fish, so it's got that crispy restaurant style to it. Just a little bit of white pepper, some black pepper, and some lemon pepper. Not enough to affect it, but to just give it that aftertaste that you can't really put your finger on what it is. That's the hope, anyway.
Oh, and that's the fish right in the pan there.
Yep.
Oh, gee,
most of this
neat.
is northern pike. Occasionally you get some smaller pieces that are jack perch. But for the most part, the thicker stuff here is northern. There's a few pieces of perch. This has got a very clean aftertaste. It's a nice texture. You cook it until it floats, and it's got a crispy finish on the outside. And there's you should never get that fishy taste or flavor from it. But you cook it in exactly the same medium that you cook everything else in. You just lower the temperature, and the odor from the last thing you cooked absorbs into the salt bed. And then you cool it and bring it back up to temp, and you can cook 3 or 4 different things without ever tasting what you cook. The odor settles into the salt bed. Mild salt brine. Yep. Let them cook.
How did they come up with these, like the combination for the sandwich?
I'm sure that it was functionality first, because they didn't have coolers, so everything had to be either cured or in a raw state. And of course, you were bringing the fish right in and cooking it. So the fact that you cured the salt pork or the fatback meant that you could carry it just in a bag or in the dinner basket, and you didn't have to worry about it going south, spoiling while you were out on the river. And then, of course, they found that if you took regular grease, like if you took just household cooking oil, and cooked over a hardwood fire, the amount of heat that comes out of that just naturally is significantly higher than that of cooking over a stove. So you'd run into the problem of destabilizing the grease and catching your pan on fire, and then it's all over once you catch your pan on fire because you burn up your grease. And the salt allows you to carry about 50 degrees more temperature in the pan because of the stabilizing of the salt. So if you can cook at 350 over this fire with normal grease, you can cook up to 400 comfortably with the same, the same amount of comfort in the pan at 400 degrees because that salt stabilizes the oil. So you can bring it up quicker without burning it too. The bed does all kinds of different cool things, but it was a trial and error, I'm sure. That right off the heat entirely, and you let it just stabilize. That'll come back down, and if you want to speed that up a little bit, just put just a little bit of oil in it to drop that temperature. We season it just like a pan, so all of this will end up in here, and you can regulate your temperature just by taking a little of this and you're skimming off the top. And if you have a cold spot in the pan, then you can just put a little bit of grease up underneath that on the wood, and so it holds the temperature, it doesn't just flash. And now we're about 325, we're almost where we want to be, 350. And it takes almost no time. We're at temperature, so we take these,
Oh my goodness.
and you literally drop and flop is the name of the game here.
Drop and flop.
Yep. You drop this.
I like that.
You drop this the bread in. You pick it up and flop it, and then it hits.
Oh.
Smell that burst of vanilla when it hits the. When it hits, it'll permeate the entire area here pretty shortly.
Cool.
And now the goal is to have it completely crisp on each side. You flip it and it maintains the internal moisture from the batter but cooks the batter, so it's like a glazed donut.
Oh,
So
my
it's
goodness.
crispy on the outside, moist on the inside, flavor carries all the way through it.
I like that.
And of course, this, just the nature of this type of bread, it's nice and dense, so you get a nice golden brown color as it finishes.
Good. Wow, gee, look at that.
And the flavor is just, you just can't duplicate it inside a house. Just, you can't carry that kind of a temperature without burning, normally.
You mean our regular stove?
Right, yep. Even when you're cooking it with gas, it's difficult.
And you lay it like this, and you just take a few strips of the salt pork and just lay them across the center, like that. And then you take a couple pieces of onion and lay that out across it, and then grab this Thousand Islands dressing, do it right through the center. It comes out. And then you fold it like that and eat.